Dr. Rob Ramseyer, welcome to the Way of Champions podcast. So excited to chat with you finally and also talk about your new book.
Thanks, John. Excited to be with you. Been a long
Yeah.
time listener.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I, it's been an amazing journey. This podcast has been going into its eighth year now. And it's like, a lot of people who started out as listeners and then have like written books and whatever. And so it's always cool to meet people who have listened to the podcast for a long time. And hopefully it's getting better. Hopefully I'm getting better at what I do.
Well, I initially found you through one of your books. A friend had sent me to it, and then just searched you and found the podcast. And yeah, you put out a lot of good stuff. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate that. We've been putting together a membership site and trying to sort of add all the stuff into one place, and it's been a really interesting project to put that together, and then going through 400 and something interviews of like, wow, like I forgot about that one, and that was
Mhm.
really good, and that was from 2018, and holy cow, and oh my god, the audio was horrible on that one. Things like that. So
Yeah, I get it.
um make these decisions of like, well, the content was so good that I'm gonna put out the bad audio and deal with it.
Mhm.
So um awesome. So Rob, just wanted to just tell people kind of what you do before
Mhm.
we dive into the book here.
Yeah, I'll give you a quick bio because my journey's been an interesting one. I went to college and thought I was either going to be a lawyer or a high school coach and teacher. And somehow ended up in college baseball for about a decade
Mhm.
at the small school level. And now I'm entering this is my 10th year in athletic administration. So I'm currently the vice president of athletics at Friends University. It's an NAI school in Wichita. Um, but we published the book under the what we call the Impactful Coaching Project, which was me and my partner named Dustin Gallion. He's our golf coach here at Friends, and we coached together at a past school. And he became a head coach at age 24, a head college coach. He was coaching basketball at the time, and me at 26. And we realized we knew very, very little and had a lot of pretty expensive experience on how to do it. And
Mhm.
didn't find a lot of resources out there like your books and what you do at the time. There just wasn't much. So we were relying on each other and kind of trial and error. And we're like, if we ever get to a place where we think we can help other people, let's do it. And um, yeah, so we launched the Impactful Coaching Project a little over a year ago, and the impetus for that was we had a donor come to our school and wanted to fund something entrepreneurial. And it was going to give three or four hundred thousand dollars to the winning kind of proposal, and we did not get it. We're like, hey, we finally put this together. Let's give it a shot. So we've been at it for a little over a year now.
Oh, it's awesome, man. And did you sort of write the book so you could do this work, or did you do this work and the book came out of it?
We're passionate about the work, and as we were just putting together like what do we think, how does this work, and we really felt strongly on it just needs to be very practical things that you can put out there and go do. um, Quite frankly, that's why I've been attracted to your work. When I read Changing the Game, it was like that. And as we got into it, we started doing some consulting, and we thought a book would be helpful, so we just started working at it. And we actually have one published for both of us. And then we just did another one of just me that we use in our consulting work. And yeah,
Gotcha.
it's just kind of been in our blood and our guts for almost 20 years now, and just wanted to get it down and see how we can help.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I really liked about the book, and by the way, it's called the Impactful Coaching Project: Leading Coaching the 21st Century Athlete for our listeners. Um, is it's sort of it's your ideas, but it's also like you really do a nice job interspersing some research,
Mhm.
of like, okay, this is what the research says is the definition of this or the definition of that, or this is what athletes want, or this is what so it's kind of I really enjoyed it because it's this nice sort of blend of your ideas backed by the science of it and not just your ideas thrown on paper wondering, well, is Rob full of it or whatever. So that was cool.
I appreciate that. And yeah, I'm kind of a data geek and enjoy diving into that side of it. And something we've been able to do that's pretty cool. And I'm kicking myself. I wasn't doing this 10 years ago, but we work in higher education.
Hmm.
We probably should be doing some sort of research, and
Yeah.
we do anonymous evaluations with our student athletes every year for every single program we do. So starting last year, we just started putting a research question in, and
Mm,
we're going to do a research question in a year.
mm,
We have some partners on the academic side of the house that are smarter than me and can explain some of the data side. But that's been a big piece of what we're doing is what are the questions we have, and let's dive into it and get some real data that's backed and interspersing it with our research of other folks. And uh,
hmm.
it's been fun and it's been, I think, helpful.
Yeah. Let me ask you, just because you're on the topic. I'm always curious about immediate athlete feedback.
Hmm.
And because I think most of us can think back to who are the impactful coaches in our lives. And I think you actually write in the book how I think it was your college baseball coach who's really tough. He said, you said like maybe not so much on you, but
Hmm.
on other people, but his, directness towards them kind of hurt your confidence of sort of like this fear of it. And I don't know where that coach sits in your life of like impactful figures, but when I think of my life and the most impactful coaches, teachers, professors in college, things like that, I didn't always love them in the moment. I appreciated them afterwards. And so, how does that? I'm always curious when athletic directors and athletic departments are doing exit interviews and things like that, which is important. How skewed is that data because it's in the moment?
Yeah. Um, it's a very fair question, and I hated him as a coach
Yeah.
because you always assume, hey, this kid didn't play, or I had this conflict. And what I found is we give a little space after the season before we do it, and I give a pretty stern talk to the kids of, hey, if I think you're just trying to be a jerk,
Hmm.
I'm deleting it. I'm not even considering it.
Right.
And I've gained a lot of faith in kids over the years, where
Yeah.
I think 99% of them are pretty fair. Um, and as we've done it, I mean, we got years and years of this data now of just the feedback, where we can tell if it's helpful, if it's not, how to lead coaches through that process of, hey, man, we're not firing you because five kids were pissed off about this.
Mm.
But how do we learn from it?
Yeah.
And I think we write in the book somewhere we had a mentor, both Dustin and I, named Joel Kaufman, where he said there's always a kernel of truth in the feedback. That may be it,
100%. one Hundred
but
percent.
there's a kernel in there. So let's listen to that. Let's take a step back and pay attention. But in terms of from the AD role, I think this is some of the harder question. I've got to build trust enough with our coaches that they trust me to discern the feedback and walk with them and not react emotionally either.
Yeah. And I mean, I would be interesting to also cross reference. Okay, here's the soccer team's feedback and here's the seniors, and cross reference that with playing time or
Yeah.
something like that. And so that senior who barely played, do those tend to skew 10 to 20 points lower than the ones who played a lot and things like that? Have you familiar with that? And then I would also think there might be a difference of a kid at a power four. I think there's
Yeah.
power four conference now.
Who knows,
School
who knows what
who
it is now?
you got to keep up,
Might be power
right?
too.
Who thinks, oh my God, I came out of a pro soccer academy, or I'm on the next train to the NFL, and their feedback is very different than a kid who maybe goes to a Division III school or an NAIA school or something like that. Of like, athletics is not my path; it's part of what I do, and so I don't know. I'm just throwing out
Yeah.
ideas.
Well, here's some interesting data for you. So, like last year, our question was very open-ended. What motivates you to participate in your sport?
Mm,
And it's interesting. 60% of all the answers were about some sort of relationship.
mm,
Okay.
I like that.
And here's where the kicker is that it was really interesting. The number one relationship was mentioned was teammates. So the value of the peer. Number two was family.
Oh.
Yeah, which I was surprised. And then a long way down was the coach.
Wow.
And the longer they were here, so we get basic data of like how many years have you been here, that kind of thing. The longer they had been here, the more relationships mattered. So
And stronger on the teammate relationships or
on the teammate relationships. And we're drilling down on that with some of our research questions this year, but the kids that stick, and I think your point's good of our level versus another one, because I chuckle with people when they ask me about NIL and the transfer portal of we've always had free transfer rules at our level. We're not a jail, kids can go where they want. So that didn't change.
Mhm.
But there's always a senior or two that are disgruntled if they don't play. I don't want to trivialize that. That's a real
Yeah.
thing. But by and large, I think a lot of those kids have learned that the value and the friendships and the relationships where I think often that can overcome the playing time piece.
Yeah, and this is what I talk about a lot with coaches, especially on the Division 1 level now, is because of the ease of transfer,
hmm
it's so easy to walk away from that difficult situation where you're fighting for playing time, where you're out of your comfort zone, but you stick it out. Or you stick it out for 4 years because you love the university and you just embrace it all, but you keep playing even though you didn't. And I told this story. I had the Vermont soccer coaches on right after they won the national title, and I used to coach at University of Vermont. And so during the Final Four, I had was getting so many texts and calls and pictures sent from alums, including people I played for. And one of the things that I was really amazed about was like a couple of them who were really just all over it never played. But there they were. They got in an airplane. They flew across the country to go to a Final Four, right? And watch their school, and they never really played, right? And yet the program and the school and everything meant that much. And I thought that was really telling to me of like, and so I coached there 20 years ago.
hmm
Would that happen today? Would that kid stick it out for 4 years, barely playing? I think it happens less, you know.
Yeah.
So, but I think what you just said about relationships is super important research.
Yeah. And I think I have a question for you after I say this, but
Yeah.
I think it's on the coaches and even my role as an athletic director. How do we make our environments sticky and the
Hmm.
relationships are palpable where we really, um, that's the value in it. You want to win.
Yeah.
We have a lot of very good teams here. But if that's the end goal, it just doesn't matter. And I've transferred of there's always that coach that really has the personality. They can be the follow me up the hill and have the charisma to pull it off. But I think, and this is what I've told me and Dustin have talked to our coaches, this stuff we're seeing in the research is the coach's job is community builder and how quickly can we get our kids to care about each other? And
Yeah.
then that's the coach's role is no less important, but
Yeah.
it's not the role that I thought I had as a coach where I was the man, everybody was looking at me and I could motivate them. It's how can I get them building relationships with each other so fast that that's the value and there's deep care for one another.
Yeah. And before you ask your question, I think it's like that's really interesting, um, because it's really then from the coach's standpoint, how do I create the environment where these relationships can be built and exist, and I can foster those relationships. And yes, 100% my relationship to my athletes matters, but how do I also create that environment? And it would be really interesting, like in your, I think your question is a fascinating one, right? What motivates you to play? And then the follow up of like, does your coach provide that environment or something like that,
Mhm.
right? Like, what does your coach do to foster the things that motivate you to play? I mean, that's the kind of feedback that I think could be helpful regardless of playing time, because
Yeah.
it's like this thing, right? It's like playing time and recognition. That's what drives, that's where as an AD your problems come from.
Yep. And the just general unhealth of the sport culture in the world.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yep.
but here's my question because we were really surprised where family popped up as the number two under relationships. Your expertise kind of writing and research in the youth sport world. I'm curious just your take on that. Does that surprise you? Does it not? Just kind of give me your off the cuff reactions.
You know, it might have surprised me a couple of years ago. I don't think it surprises me anymore. And just because now, especially on this podcast, talk to so many, professional Olympic athletes who talk about the role of their parents or parent or whoever. And, it really hit home for me. I don't know, maybe a year ago. I had a guy who he's a pro soccer coach in the US and England, and he had played 600 top flight games over in Scotland and England. And he said, when I was a 34-year-old pro, the first phone call after the game was to my dad, right? And so it's like if that's his first call, it's definitely the first call or the first conversation probably for your 22-year-olds and
Yeah.
your 19-year-olds and whatever. So to think that family dynamics don't play a role, now is there, again, the dig in, the family relationship that motivates me to play. Is that because I don't want to let my parents down if I quit because I really don't want to play basketball, but it means so much to them? So there could be
Mhm.
an unhealthy aspect to that. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair one. I don't know how to get at this, but I have four children. My oldest is in fifth grade, and I worry sick of because I, in part, work in athletics. They're going to play sports just because that's what dad does. So we've made them almost beg to play, and our oldest is doing club volleyball for the first time. And so it's my first foray since I was in school is seeing that world. And there's such a family investment
Hmm.
that it makes sense to me that that's the motivator. And I almost wonder if it becomes a family identity where, because I know a lot of the problems you said jokingly, the problems I deal with, um, when people get to me and they're frustrated, we either owe them an apology, or they're crazy.
Hmm.
And I think it's a threat to we've put so much into this and now we're not good enough or it's not going as we hoped that there are some pretty extreme reactions at times. And I
Hmm.
think it ties back to that level of family investment of time and money.
Yeah, I 100%. And there's a really interesting guy, Travis Dorsch, out of Utah State, I think, who's doing research in
Mm.
this area. He's got the most research that I've seen, and he's talking about this that kids are very cognizant of the time and the money that sports costs, and so that can sap motivation and joy, right? When again they don't really maybe don't want to be there anymore. They've done it. They've had a good run, and they're like, yeah, now you know what? I'd rather hang out this weekend with my friends, or go to the party, or get a
Yeah.
job. But I just don't know how to tell my parents that I'm not playing volleyball anymore. And so
Hmm.
it's interesting. And like you said, you know, these events. I mean, I have a family member who has a daughter who's going to play Division 1 volleyball, and they live in a huge metropolitan area, and yet, you know of their 10 weekends of volleyball this spring, 8 are a flight or a whatever drive. And I'm like, there's 7 million people live where you live. Like, how is that possible that you have to go to Ohio and
Yeah.
Florida and Vegas and all these places? It just seems crazy. And so the financial investment is significant. And so I think what happens as well is then that becomes the friend group for
Hmm.
parents. And then that also becomes the that's vacation, is
Yeah.
going to the tournament in Las Vegas because that's where all our money's going. And so it's a really interesting dynamic as the costs and the commitments have gone up, that this means so much to my family. I can't stop now. That's
Yeah.
reality.
And we're kind of rabbit trailing here, but that environment, all us that work in college sports, we're beneficiaries of that.
Yeah.
There's numbers out there to recruit and kids are getting better. Um, but it's a system that I don't know how you slow it down now, but it's certainly, um, yeah, I'm certainly hoping we can tweak it back to the local sports and they can have a life outside this. I mean, if you're traveling all over the country every weekend, that's it. I mean, there's no other balance to life.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, the only thing that I thought, okay, maybe COVID would be that stop button, then people would reassess and go, oh, family dinner, oh, whatever. But it didn't. It just actually made it worse.
Yeah.
Um, so now I look at it and I say, well, is the only potential stop button all these changes that are happening with football and NIL and athletes getting paid if programs start cutting sports, right? Or if there is no scholarship, number one, and number two, admissions preference for athletes, then is it worth spending $10,000 plus a year to play volleyball or soccer or 20,000 for hockey or whatever it is, right? If it's
Mhm.
not going to help my kid get into school and there's no money on the backside of it, is all of this worth it? For some people, they'll say yes, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I think they'll say, can we tone it down a little bit? That's just
Yeah.
my opinion.
And that's where I think the work we're doing, the work you're doing matters because I go back to, I think it was 2 years ago. We had a coach from England,
Mm-hmm.
and he could not get over the lack of training that was required for coaches in the U.S.
Yeah.
And so, and that's where I kind of go, okay, if we have this youth culture that keeps growing, how do we train coaches to do it in a healthy way instead of just, hey, you play sport here, here's your whistle and go.
Yeah, and again, yeah, you go overseas and most coaches at a higher level, so a university level, a professional level, have a degree in something, whether it's kinesiology or sports psychology or, whatever, some sort of sports science degree or a coaching degree, right? So they've done higher education and then
Yeah.
they've done their licensing and their certifications and things like that. Where here, oftentimes that's not the case. And it's certainly the case with me. I mean, I don't have a degree in coaching or something like that, and I coached for 30 years. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
And
tough.
then somehow, I don't know how, but I've had Norway's youth development system come up in conversation or books like 3 or 4 times last 2 weeks. So I've been digging in.
Yeah.
And yeah, they have per capita, I mean, more high performers than most countries, and they don't even keep score and it's local until they're 13.
Yeah.
So just such a totally different animal. But yeah, there's just, yeah, a lot of ways to do it.
Yeah, and we have to I think we're always have to be careful. Certainly the United States is incredibly unique
Mm.
geographically, the different weather, the culture, different cultures, and all these sort of things versus a very homogenistic, small, wealthy population like Norway. You're not. It's not apples to apples. You
Yeah,
couldn't
that's fair.
just say, "Here you go. Let's just do what Norway does." Like that's not it. But certainly countries like Norway and Australia has been pretty good at this and stuff. When you have a limited pool of athletes, you can't afford for kids to break and drop out. In the
Yeah.
United States, we can throw a dozen eggs against the wall and hope one doesn't break, right? And win an Olympic gold.
I'd never thought about it that way, and that makes a lot of sense. And I think the other unique thing, I read a book in grad school called Games Colleges Play, and
Mm-hmm.
it was written by a higher ed historian and his or higher ed kind of sports historian, and his first line called Intercollegiate Athletics America's Peculiar Institution,
Yeah.
because nowhere else in the world is it like this, where it
Yeah.
all built up in the higher colleges are kind of the Olympic development system for a lot of sports. And
They
yeah,
they
it's
really are for a lot of countries
yeah,
too. I
a lot.
mean,
Yeah,
if
fair.
if if track and field and swimming go away on the NCAA level, it's not just the US that'll suffer. It'll
Hmm.
actually probably be the US will figure out a way and all these other countries will suffer
Yeah.
because that's their path of because they don't have the infrastructure and the pools and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's really interesting. Well, let's get into the book. And one of the interesting things um that kind of hit me right away. I was reading sort of the philosophy of leadership section, and you talk about transformational versus transactional, and break that down because it's not how I would define them, or certainly that we define them. And reading it, I get exactly what you're saying, and maybe it's just semantics. But
Hmm.
talk about these two components of coaching, and why you think both are necessary.
Yeah. So on a just a very high level, transactional leadership is just the meat and potatoes of I say I'm going to do this, I do it, and you say you're going to do that, and you do it. And there's a lot of layers underneath, but that's the basic gist. And um, at least in the worlds I've been in, when you hear transactional, you think it lacks humanity
Hmm.
and it's just not good. So I had this perspective of transactional leadership. No, that's not who I'm going to be. Flip side, transformational is that kind of higher order motivation where as the coach or the environment inspires people to think beyond themselves and to impact others. And I mean, a lot of us that get into sports or coaching, we can all think to that coach that just inspired us. One of mine was named Mike Gear. And when he talked, I listened and I was just ready to go. So, um, where I think we get it wrong is we get coaches that want to change the world and impact every kid and all that stuff, which is great, but they jump right to the transformational coaching piece and let me impact you, but they jump over the relationships and trust that needs to be established to do that. So I can think of one or two coaches over my years as an AD whose hearts were great. They were wonderful people, but they jumped to essentially let me help you live life and make this impact on you, but they never established trust. And they didn't follow through on the basic X's and O's of being a coach from be as simple as we're both on time, or if you here's the accountability if you're late, or those simple things. They jumped over that or didn't do it well. All of a sudden they had no impact on their team because there was no trust. And then
Hmm.
they're looking at these high inspirational type goals, and everybody's like, "What are you doing, dude? You haven't earned the
Yeah,
right to
your
hear you."
practice is a disaster, or
Yeah.
you showed up late, or there's you forgot to order the team meal, or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, or you told us you were going to do this, this, and this, and you did none of it. So that's the slant we take at it is pace matters
Hmm.
um, in terms of clarity of expectations and both sides executing those expectations.
Hmm. So again, when I read that, I'm like, okay, I get what he's saying here, right? That the transaction of coaching is the organization and the X's and O's and running great practices and whatever. And I mean, like Steve Kerr has been on the podcast and he's like, you know what? Like, you got to know what you're talking about.
Yep.
You have to do that part before, the relationships don't matter. You'll lose the locker room if they don't think you can help them at basketball, right?
Mhm.
And so I totally get that part. So then I guess define what trust means for you. What is trust in the athlete coach relationship? Because I
Mhm.
don't think trust can exist. Maybe there's levels of trust, right? But
Yeah.
trust can't exist just on, oh, Rob knows a lot about baseball or John knows a lot about soccer. Trust has to do with connection and relationships as well.
Yeah, and I think you're right on I don't know if I have a perfect definition for you, but I think the levels, as you said that makes sense to me. And I think the basic level is what I said a second ago. If I do what I say, you do what you say. And especially into today's world, not to sound like an old fart, get off my lawn type guy, but the coach needs to mean what they say uh,
100%.
and follow through on those things. Because I've watched some coaches fail too. And again, well-meaning, well-versed, wonderful people. But in the heat of the moment after the game, they start saying, we're going to do this, 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 and this. And then Monday rolls around and they don't do any of it.
Hmm.
So, and I think this generation of kid, the Gen Z kid, can sniff out a fraud very quickly.
Yeah.
So, on a base level, if you're not meaning what you say and following through, you lose trust. I think the deeper levels of trust is what you're getting at comes in that transformational piece. And I think that comes with time, wisdom, and really spending just the depth of what happens. Like for example, one of the things I miss the most about coaching, I coached for about a decade, is I love doing one-on-one meetings with the guys, getting to know
Hmm.
them. and that's where trust was built, where I tell people it's crazy to think back on because I was this 26, 27, 28-year-old head coach, didn't know anything. Quite frankly, don't think I did a very good job the first few years, but I knew enough where be in the office with them and I'd shut up and listen.
Hmm.
And it took a couple times, a couple meetings, but then the stuff that kids needed to share once they trusted you and you could lead them was unbelievable. And
Hmm.
they talk about these trials and family relationships and all that kind of stuff. And I think that got us to the next level of I spent the time. And then what I did with that information was I didn't judge them. I didn't say, you know what, stop, you better not tell me this. It was just listening and then walking with them from there. So
Hmm. And
that's a
that's a
long,
very consistent.
yeah,
Well, no, but I think, two things, right? Number one, what you say about those individual meetings, that's a very consistent piece of feedback that we've gotten from this podcast. When you ask coaches what's the most impactful part of the coaching, or the another way to ask it is, if you could do your career again, what would you do more of? And one-on-one meetings always comes up, right?
yeah,
That's where the best coaching is done. And I remember Becky Burley on here once told us, she said, um, I just started learning that whenever we had that meeting, the first question I should ask is, what's the most important thing we can talk about today?
yeah,
And more often than not, it had nothing to do. She was a college soccer coach, right? It had
yeah. I
nothing to
had her
do.
on my podcast. She's phenomenal.
Yeah, she's wonderful, right? And so I think that's the kind of thing that is really important. And then, sort of, to draw it back into the trust thing, what I heard a simple definition recently that said trust is, your athlete's ability to predict how you're going to react in any situation.
Yeah.
And I kind of like that as a simple thing. Like, if I show up late today, the reaction should be the same as if I show up late tomorrow, right? It
Hmm.
shouldn't be it's whatever, right? And if I you know I trust you if I know that what practice is always organized and sharp. And it's not always great, and you get it wrong sometimes, but like, there's a plan and the coach cares, and they've prepared. And when we go on road trips, yeah, we leave on time, and the bus is this, and we have food and all that sort of stuff. And
Yeah.
I mean, I talk to athletes all the time, kids that I've coached or whatever, who are like, yeah, and I was at this program, and all of a sudden we didn't get dinner one night, and you're supposed to play the next day, and things
Yeah.
like that are just like, well, if I can't trust you to feed me, what else can I trust you about?
Yeah.
So I think that's important.
That goes well with it actually connects to Becky. I saw a podcast a long time ago. We actually listened to one. We actually wrote about in the book, I believe. But it was Brett Ledbetter, Becky's
Hmm.
partner. He had a saying about trust is won and lost in how you react to the moments that take you off guard.
Yeah,
And I
love
thought
it.
that was just magnificent. 'Cause if
Yeah,
there's something that keeps me up night as an AD is in the heat of the moment, a coach acting in a way they can't come back from, and
yeah,
number one, they lose their team, but number two, I get pulled into it and we may have to make some employment decisions depending on how extreme it was. But yeah, trust is won and lost and how you react to the moments that take you off guard. I thought that was just profound.
yeah. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful way to put it, for sure. 100%.
Hmm.
You have a really interesting chapter on navigating Gen Z. And one of the things I liked about it was, and I don't have the whole book in front of me here, I just have some notes, but you laid out a couple of scenarios of, like, what's the answer to which generation feels like this, and this, right? And obviously it was Gen Z, but maybe if you can just give our listeners, again, a quick overview of what is unique about Gen Z, about the kids that we're coaching today, that is maybe different than it was 20 years ago, or certainly if you're 50 years old and you're a coach now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this was some of Dustin's expertise. We're kind of an interesting pair because he's about as extroverted as I am introverted. And he's been traveling the country speaking on leadership and all this different stuff for 20 years. And so we stole some of what he says in a lot of his speeches, but he talks about um, Generation Z, highest IQ, but lowest EQ, so emotional intelligence. They're the most globally engaged. What else we put in there? they want community, but they don't want the commitment that follows it. And
Hmm.
they struggle with face-to-face confrontation or conversation. So
Hmm.
uh, we hesitated on how to do this chapter because it's a generation we love, and we think it's overplayed of, oh, they're all so lazy and they suck. That's sometimes the general premise, and I don't buy that one as much. But it's the first generation that grew up essentially with Facebook. I mean, I'm 41 years old, Facebook came out when I was in college.
Hmm.
Um, so they've had this online world. The kids we're working with now at the college level, they had the COVID piece, and they just come at it from a different scope. Where again, this isn't research back. You talk about admiring that, but they have a community online, I believe they can go to that will always agree with them. And if they don't, they can jump to the next one.
Yeah.
So we have that piece to navigate of how do we get kids to trust us, go back to that, but also build community and have these face-to-face conversations and sometimes confrontations that they don't like, they don't know how to do, they've never been forced to do it. And one person we rely heavily on in a lot of our stuff is a guy named Tim Elmore.
Hmm.
And he talks about this generation needs two things to know it, to really trust a leader. And one is authenticity.
Hmm.
Um, they live in this online world, but somehow they can spot a fake. I think it's because they know how much work it takes to make their life look perfect online. And then the second thing is you have to be competent. So
Hmm.
authenticity and then competence, because Generation Z, they know how to go look up any information they want. And
Hmm.
so yeah, I think it's an energizing group. I think Gen Z is loyal when you meet them where they're at and give them say in their community, but
Hmm.
it's challenging work.
Yeah, and I think, one of my favorite Tim Elmore quotes is, build a relationship that can bear the burden of truth. Because
Yep.
as coaches, we still have to be truth tellers, and we have to build that relationship, and that comes from both the competence and then, like you said, the authenticity and that connection of I'm an imperfect being and you're an imperfect being, but I have your best interest in mind. And I think that
Yep.
is really critical, and understanding these kids, again, they've been raised. I think the way you put it was just really good. They've been raised with phones in their hands. They're it's very easy to be just entertained and
Mhm.
easily distracted and things like that.
Yeah.
And what you said about if they don't like what this community is saying, it's just easy to find another echo chamber that
Hmm.
will agree with them. And one of the challenges, Anson Dorrance on this podcast said the job of the coach is as quickly as possible to get each athlete's personal narrative to the truth, right? And because they're raised in this place where oftentimes it's not, their club coach, their private trainer has told them that they're fantastic. If the club coach benches them, we go find another club.
Hmm.
The whole self-esteem movement of the 90s and 2000s that said just praise people no matter what and everything will work out. And we've now seen how damaging that is. And so that's who's in front of you. And it's not
Hmm.
their fault, but this is the person that you have to coach. And so building that relationship, having the competence, and then having the ability to get them to the truth of the reason you're not playing is not because I don't like you,
Yeah.
right? It's because so and so's better than you,
Hmm.
right? And I need you to be better. And here's your path to getting better, right?
Hmm.
And then do you have the resilience to bounce back from this disappointment and the grit to put in the work to get there? And I think that's what we're doing as coaches these days. And it's harder maybe than it was 20 years ago, but you can stick your head in the sand, or you can say, well, some people are reaching these kids, so I,
Yeah.
I have to as well.
And they're what we got, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
if you want to be in it, and I think the other interesting one, and we were at Friends University here on an interesting track where a couple years ago in our postseason evaluations, one of our lower scores was we asked a question of, is practice motivating and is practice productive? And those were low scores. And I look and I'm like, that's a problem as much time as we spend at this.
Hmm.
And I think part of that was how we teach in the digital generation, where I do think there's less of an attention span. So we have to adjust how we do it. But also coming out of that club sport piece where it's so much play, you never had to practice. So
Hmm.
I think there's this new burden's the wrong word, but we have to rethink how we lead practice sessions and how we and how we organize our time and even film sessions. So our film room's right outside my door right now, and the gym's 200 feet that way.
Yeah.
Uh, I think our coaches are screwing up if they go longer than 10 minutes in a film session. I'd rather see them show some film, go out and practice, come back because the information retention isn't great. And I think kids are very much tangible, hands-on. That's where they're going to remember now. So,
Right. Or film in again, that one-on-one
yeah,
meeting of like, hey, here's a couple clips. Let me give me some feedback. Let me know what you think.
yeah.
Right. Or do you want to sit down and go through these or whatever? Here's what I'm seeing. Right. But the general film, when you're like, this isn't even about me. Right. And then just, yeah, it's like, again, we got to be quick. We got to be to the point. We got to be moving quickly. And then, yeah, I mean, why are they there? They want the play. And so can we
Yeah.
create those play scenarios?
I think the other thing interesting on Gen Z, and I can't remember the term, what's in my head, a spotlight effect, where like I was a baseball player.
Mhm.
Whenever I struck out, walked back to the dugout, it feels like the eyes of the world are on you.
Yeah.
I think whatever the term is for that, I think that's been magnified as much as possible now with the social media world where we put our lives out there to people on social media. So therefore we think
But
whenever
we
something
want to filter it.
yeah, we want to filter it, but we assume if it goes bad, everybody knows. And in
Yeah.
reality, everybody's more worried about themselves.
Yeah.
Nobody really cares.
Yeah,
So,
100%.
uh,
It's so again, all these things fit into it, and the writing and research being done in this area, I think, is just really important for today's coaches to understand. Kids have been very, overprotected in the real world, and it's been a free for all online,
mhm.
right?
Yep.
And so you're combating that overprotectiveness and that protection and that I've never failed a class or I always got to hand it in late. And now, it's this is big boy
Right.
or big girl sports. And, you don't get to hand it in late anymore.
Yeah. I don't know if you know him. Bruce Brown from
Yeah.
Proactive Coaching has been a friend and starting to become a mentor. Dude, he's incredible. But I asked him the question of how do you think this generation changed? And um, he cited, I had to do a double take at time. He spoke with John Wooden on stage.
Yeah.
And somebody asked Wooden that question in the 90s or 2000s. And Wooden said, he goes, I don't know if kids have changed. I think they have the same needs. Parents have changed.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably stayed true over time.
Yeah. Parenting changes.
Yeah.
So therefore, the kids are just a reflection of how they were parented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they have the same core needs they've always had of wanting to be loved and accepted, challenged, all those kind of things.
Yeah, definitely 100%. So let's dive into, right, you sort of the three core competencies of coaching is these three C's you talk about. And I'm always amazed, right? My first book was The Seven C's of a High Performing State of Mind. It, like all these great C words around
Yeah.
performance and coaching. But yeah, I love this. So maybe we can just break each of those down just really over, starting with competence. And I think we've kind of talked about that a little bit, but go
Yeah,
ahead.
it goes back to the Elmore stuff we talked about of if you don't know what you're talking about, then number one, what are you doing? Why are you coaching?
Yeah.
But this generation can sniff out a fraud. And I think the complexity I'd highlight that we write about in there is not only do you need to know the right stuff, you need to know the wrong stuff because your kids are going online and finding information on Twitter, Instagram, whatever it may be. And in that world, the best marketer wins, not the best information. So I think you have to be able to filter out what's good and what's bad and
Yeah.
being able to have those conversations with kids.
Yeah. And what I like about that section for you is um competence for you again is not just the drills you're running,
Mhm.
right? It's also what we would call, and I don't necessarily love the term, but the soft skills, like being a
Mhm.
good listener and communicator and things like that, right? That's part of coaching competence. And it's the thing that coaches don't necessarily get in coaching schools enough. But
Yep.
those are skills. And it might you might be naturally a better listener than me because you said, I'm kind of introverted, so I'm quiet, and so I tend to sit there and listen and pay attention, right? That might come more naturally to you, but it doesn't mean I can't get better at listening, right? And
Hmm.
I think sometimes we have a very closed or fixed mindset towards what we put on the set of soft skills for coaching, and that's just not me. And it's like,
Hmm.
yeah, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be the warmest, fuzziest teddy bear in the room, but you still have to care.
Yeah. And I think that looks so different. It gets into the systems of care piece, but we have a coach here that is as old school as it gets, and he would call himself old school. Until the day I pointed out, I go, but you got kids in your office all the time and you're shooting the breeze, building relationships.
Yeah.
That's what makes you effective. It's
Yeah.
not the knowing the game. It's you build enough trust there that you can be old school on the court.
Yeah. And I mean, you're using the word old school as in I'm raising my voice and I'm being
Yeah.
demanding. And yet, I mean, a high performing athlete, right? Someone who's saying, I want to play this on a collegiate level, that's what you should want,
Yep.
right? Demanding without demeaning is not a bad thing. That's a good thing. That's what most people want. That's what's going to make you better. And so, yeah, I mean, sometimes we look at that as old school. And again, we now also have this TV generation where we don't see the kids in the office sitting there talking relationships, helping them out, helped out with a family thing, whatever. We just see the 5 seconds of
Tom Izzo
raising your
going nuts.
voice on the bench.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not, you missed all the other part that
Yep.
allowed for that moment to become impactful.
Yep. No, that's really well said.
Yeah. All right. Culture of care. That's the
Yeah.
second C.
Yeah, so we talk a lot about kind of when we're diving into this, we're big, how do you create systems that can be consistent day after day, week after week, year after year? And Dustin had coached basketball, he had coached golf, and then we were also talking about football with a roster of 130. And it's like, how do those are all such different environments? How can you create systems and what it looks like? Because fundamental a human need is to feel cared for, in my opinion, and and have those authentic relationships. So we leaned a lot on. We're big believers in the 3D Institute and 3D coaching,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and we leaned a lot on some stuff they do, but they're just things you can put in place. And it can be as simple like if I were to go back and coach again, I would not just yuck it up with my assistants after practice. They would walk back to the locker room with a different kid every day, and
Mm-hmm.
that 2 minutes matters, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And they'd pick another kid to text on the way home, hey, you did good at this today, something specific. And anything like that, I think, builds this culture where kids are cared for.
Yeah.
Uh, one
And
thing
be
I've, yeah, go
and
ahead.
just being intentional about those moments, just like you're intentional about what's the fitness component of practice or
Yeah,
what's the play we're going to work on or whatever. We also just need to be intentional about after practice, who are we going to hit, who are we going to talk to, who are we going to reach out to.
yeah. And 3D talks about something that we've put in about every phase of our athletic department here called put-ups,
Mm-hmm.
where essentially it's affirmation in front of a group.
Yeah.
And they have different versions of that in a spotlight. And making kids feel recognized for stuff that's just not, hey, you hit a big shot today, great job, but
Right.
you were a great teammate because of this, or I was a little nervous about it. We even put it in our athletic department meetings where once a month we do a spotlight where you make somebody stand up and the group affirms them, and
Mm-hmm.
all these coaches roll their eyes until they're the one spotlighted and they have tears in their eyes, so um, it can be really simple. Um, it can be really what you need, but that consistency, well thought out, where you're getting touch points with kids and affirming them beyond just what they can do for the team or you on the field.
Yeah. Yeah. You also mentioned in there the post game talk, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is if I had to do a do over on any one segment of my coaching, it would have been post game talks,
Yeah.
like saying less or nothing at all more often.
I don't think we put this in the book, but I have a scary moment as a coach where we lost a game we shouldn't, and I'm going after the team because I thought that's what I was supposed to do, and I black out. Like all of a sudden, I am on the back row of the guys, chest to chest with one of the kids, and I don't remember any of it.
Huh.
And the kid I chest to chest with teases me to this day. It was a good relationship, and I'm pretty sure that story has grown to what it not what it was with the guys over the years. But I had a transformational moment my first year with our current football coach where we just got drilled one game, and I thought he was going to blow him up, rightfully so, after the game. And he did the exact same thing he had done the previous week when we won. And it was, I can't remember exactly. Offensive player put up a defensive player put up an offensive player, talked about game-changing plays, thanked their parents for coming and left.
Yeah.
And I asked him, I'm like, I didn't mind it, but I didn't expect it. What were you thinking? And he just said he learned the hard way. If he didn't have a plan and if it wasn't short, he'd say things he didn't he would regret. And that instant was transformational for me as a leader and how I handle stuff and how I talk to coaches.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think there's outside the systems of care, I think it's just practical. Kids are tired. They're not hearing what you're saying. They want to go eat with their parents or their boyfriend or girlfriend. Just get in and get out. And if it's that important, get after it tomorrow.
Yeah, I always sort of say it's kind of like vomiting. You feel better and everyone else feels worse, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like who did that serve in the moment? Was it
Hmm.
actually a teachable moment? And did your athletes recognize, right, that this
Yeah.
was, that I mean, they already know, the scoreboard just told us we got our butts kicked. Um, I feel like I got my butt kicked. That was humiliating. I don't have to be reminded about it. And more often than not, you know, like it's very easy to default as a coach to you guys just don't care today. And that's
Yeah.
not usually what it is. There's like a lot of things come before that of like, we didn't have the ability. We didn't know what you're talking about. We didn't know what the game plan was. And needed to teach it better. And then maybe comes didn't care,
Yeah.
right? And but we default to didn't care, and sometimes without first, I think, looking at what could I have done better in practice to better prepare my team. And I think we see more and more examples now of the top coaches in the world. The first thing they say at the press conference is, "I didn't have my team ready today. That's on me." Now behind the scenes, they might be like, "You know what, guys? Remember when you're falling asleep in film?
Yeah.
There was the play, and I had to wake you up, and that was the play.
Mhm.
But publicly, they're not doing that.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it is on the coach. Easy for us to say as we're not in it day to day, but I think a lot of those moments that come up where we say kids don't care, there are breadcrumbs going back probably 2 months of
Yeah,
things that have been let slide or whatever happened there. But
yeah,
uh, yeah, I just got done, or I'm in the midst of reading Steve Magnus's new book,
yeah,
and one of the chapters he opens up with talking about a scene where a Texas football got beat, and there was this viral video, I guess, of like their defensive line coach just f-bombing the guys going after him, and why don't you care? And saw one kid laughing or something and just lost it. And Magnus gets all this research of no, just physiologically in the body, that isn't the way to recover from failure.
yeah,
It's like what we think we should do. It's almost a defense mechanism. And then he goes through all this research I need to be smarter than I am to explain it to you after one read, but of the oxytocin in the body and all sorts of weird stuff of how we help people recover from failure isn't by screaming at them most of the time. Now,
no,
there's a time
and
over the table, but
we get that as teachers as well, right? Like the teacher in school, when the kids don't understand, my son the other day, he's taking calculus, and he's like, "Yeah, we all bombed the quiz." So the next day, the teacher's like, "All right, let me go over that again."
yeah.
Right? Not, let's go do laps. you know, Everyone give me 100 push-ups and 100 sit-ups. You don't understand differential equations. Like that doesn't, the teachers go, no, clearly they didn't learn this or understand this, so let me teach it better. And again, Could you cross the line? Of course. But
Mhm.
yeah, what's in that moment, what's going to make them better? And I
Exactly.
think, that third C that you talk about is sort of constant or consistency or
Yeah.
um, and like your football coach, if I'm an athlete, then I know in the locker room after consistently it's just going to be this, and then we'll get to work on Monday. I trust him or her.
Yeah. 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 That predictability
Yeah.
um, really matters. And then when they do have that moment you're talking about, is screaming on the sideline or whatever it is,
Yeah.
um, it's a really big deal,
Yeah.
and I think sometimes, and we've had these conversations, people see some of this as soft coaching, and it's more treating them as people
Hmm.
and using strategies that have been proven to work as opposed to just let's just be angry and fly by the seat of my pants. And yeah, the constant chapter really, yeah, consistent was the word we were originally going to use, and constant we just thought sounded a little more memorable that the people remember it. But how
Hmm.
are you the same person day after day, and how are you cultivating that character to be that person, while also looking at it on the competence side of how are you adapting. And we make a joke in there of everybody needs a Lane Kiffin in their life, where Nick Saban hired Lane Kiffin, which made little sense personality wise. But I don't know either of those guys, but I truly believe it was so Saban could challenge a system and learn from somebody new and different, and go from there. So constantly challenging yourself, but also just being that consistent person.
Yeah, and that's it. And curious could be another C, and
Yep.
oh, yeah,
Yep.
oh, all these things.
But people
Uh,
remember three at a time, John, so we had to
yeah,
stop.
I know. You're right. You're right. Seven was a nightmare. Why did I do seven? I can't even remember the seven anymore. People ask me, I'm like, oh God.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as we're getting near the end here, I mean, you talk about adversity and conflict resolution as well. Like any other thoughts you want to share on those? Because certainly as coaches, we work in an uncertain place. We don't know the score. We don't know what the opponent's going to do, and so whenever there's uncertainty, there's fear and there's adversity and things like that. And then in every team that we work with, there's conflict resolution. I was just working with a Division 1 team, and we just met and we talked about an incident that happened last year, and then afterwards, we're like, okay, and guess what? It's going to happen next year too.
Mhm.
Like, there's going to be a conflict. It might not be the same exact thing, but someone's not going to meet the standard. You were afraid to call them out for it last year. What's going to change this year?
Yeah. And I think it kind of ties together everything we talk about, whether it's Gen Z or, I mean, healthy conflict is that's being on a team. I mean,
Hmm.
that's just you get people together working towards a goal. It's competitive to play. You're competing against other people.
Hmm.
There's you're put together a lot, just stuff comes up.
Hmm.
And we write a lot in there on different things. But I think the one piece I look at, and it's all within reason, nothing extreme of, you protect the relationship. You're
Hmm.
attacking the actions, and as you're working with people, you protect the relationship and give them the benefit of the doubt when you can.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that matters a lot. And then the last chapter, it's something we've really, I just mentioned them, but um, become borderline obsessed of building toughness and responding to adversity.
Hmm.
Because I think we've gotten it wrong in sports for so long. And again, another Magnus book, Do Hard Things.
Hmm.
He talked about of building toughness on a team is, and coaches, we lose some coaches on it, but number one is psychological safety. And
Hmm.
that's not safe space, do whatever you want. But if you follow the rules of the team and do your best, you get to stay on the team, you get to stay in the
Hmm.
community. And
Hmm.
then number two is the ability to get better.
Hmm.
And that was Magnus's and Stolberg's definition. And then we add the third of going through hard things together, which is essentially that conflict resolution piece of let's walk through this and work at it. So that's the before the cooling chapter, the last chapter where we dive in just
Hmm.
because that piece I think we've just missed so wrong in sports, gotten so wrong in sports, and it's left so many wounds on people, I think, that were really unnecessary.
Yeah.
So trying to further that message on what toughness actually is.
Yeah. Well, it's what I like about the book is all these different topics. I can't imagine there's a coach out there who says consistency doesn't me or conflict resolution. never have any problems, right? So it's like it's really, I think it's really well done. I like how you guys share your journey and the journey of others and the research to back it up, versus just, hey, here's my N=1 coaching journey. And then, I imagine with the data that you're collecting now, it'll be really interesting how you might, you know, rewrite some of this or go, wow, you know what, we really need to add in,
This, yeah.
this because this keeps coming up and we never thought how impactful this would be. So, any final word, Rob? And then I'd love for you to share how people can connect and get the book and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, no, I just appreciate you having me on, and I think the work you're doing, what we're trying to do, is important with as many kids and people are involved in sports. Just a passion for creating a healthy environment is where we're at and want to help. So, um, where you can find the book is on Amazon. You just search my name. We actually have two books now. We wrote one for kind of athletic leadership as well, so that's on there. So just search Rob Ramseyer, and there they are. And then we have a podcast called Beyond Coaching. Where we're having conversations like this,
Mhm.
and it's funny where we're 30 episodes in, and I was real nervous to publish them. And I think I'd do it even if I didn't publish a single one because I've been learning so much from people. It's been
Yeah.
a blast.
I think every podcaster says that. You
Yeah,
start to do for others, and then at some point you're like, I just really doing this for me.
it can be better. Yeah.
Yeah,
And then we have a lot of information on our Substack is what we operate as our website. So impactfulcoachingproject.substack.com. And we put out a weekly post with some information. You get in touch with us on some consulting stuff there. And yeah, there's all that information there as well.
brilliant. Awesome. Well, Rob, this was a really wonderful conversation. Again, everyone, the book is Impactful Coaching Project, Leading and Coaching the 21st Century Athlete. And we really appreciate you being on the Way of Champions and sharing this stuff. I got a lot of notes and little clips that I'm looking forward to sharing here with everyone. So congrats on the book and keep up the great work.
Great. Thank you, John.
Thanks everyone for listening. Thanks again to Rob Ramseyer and also Dustin, who wasn't on here, and their great new book, The Impactful Coaching Project: Leading and Coaching the 21st Century Athlete. All their links, their Substack, all that stuff is in the show notes, as well as a link to the book on Amazon as well. Just a really great conversation. Backs. I really enjoyed the book, as I said, and the research and their own anecdotes and their story back a lot of the stuff that we talk about on here. But really, I was super fascinated by that statistic he shared early on that when asking their athletes in the exit interviews what motivates you to play, that the answer for 60% was relationships, which we get. But then the fact that teammate relationships, followed by family relationships, followed by coach relationships. So relationships matter, and how important it is for the coach to create the environment where those teammate relationships can grow and exist even when there's conflict. What an important thing for all of us to know. Okay. Thank you to our friends at Sprocket Sports for sponsoring this podcast. Thank you to our Patreon podcast champions. And as I mentioned, we have a new little thing going on at Changing the Game Project, a new members area. So if you just go to changingthegameproject.com, you can learn how to become an annual member there and get all this amazing stuff. We finally compiled it in one place. Get all of our courses, all of our conferences we've run, and better organized interviews than just the stream of the podcasts, plus our top blog posts and a page for coaches, for parents, and for athletes as well. So you can just get that at Change the Game Project. And it's cool to just get that up and running this week. All right. But remember, your influence is never neutral, everyone. So go out there, change the world, make a difference, and we will see you again next week.